All right. We are just a minute over the 12 o'clock hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for our June Lunch and Learn, the stress you don't see, supporting mental health and dementia care. Just a few housekeeping announcements before we really get into the presentation, before we get started. I will be following the presentation. I'll send a follow-up email. In that email will be a link to the recording of this presentation. So feel free to rewatch it or to share these slides or share that presentation with anyone. I'm also happy to send the slides out as well, too, if anybody would be interested in that. Also, in my follow-up email will be the link to a survey. If you guys could just complete that survey for us, it just is very helpful. I also wanted to discuss and invite you all to join us tomorrow for a presentation in our ADAPT series titled Nourishing Through Dementia, Practical Support for Changing Appetites. So, and I'll also be sure to include the registration link in our follow-up email as well for that presentation. And that'll be same time tomorrow from 12 to 1. So we would love to have y'all join us. And also, just if you have any questions for me or just in general during the presentation, feel free to put them down in the chat box. If you have like tech issues or anything like that, Brooke is going to be kind of monitoring the chat and things like that. And so if anything happens, just let us know. We are happy to help you guys out. So now I'd like to go ahead and get started. I'm going,
Hey, Ellen, real fast.
yeah,
If you could just adjust your the screen, it's not showing us the whole thing. It looks better now.
is
It
that
it
better?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself as I will be your presenter today for our June Lunch and Learn. So my name is Ellen Mouton. I serve as the program director and social worker here with Alzheimer's Services of the Capital Area. I began my journey with this organization in 2017, originally as an intern, and officially joined the team as a staff member in 2019. So, over the past decade, really, as a social worker and through personal experiences as well, I've had the privilege of loving, supporting, and learning from many individuals living with dementia as well as their care partners. So, these experiences, both professional and personal, have provided me with meaningful insight into what matters most, what is helpful, and what can be especially challenging along the dementia journey. So, drawing from this knowledge and this experience, I use that to really develop today's presentation. And so, my hope for today is not only to provide information, but also to offer validation and a sense of normalization for people living with dementia and their care partners that are experiencing some of these things we're going to talk about today. The mental health challenges that can arise in dementia care are often a very real and common part of this dementia experience for both individuals living with dementia and those who care for them. So, thank y'all so much for being here today, and we'll go ahead and get started on the presentation. All right, so here are our learning objectives for today. So, through this presentation, I hope to help everybody identify common mental health challenges in dementia care.
I'm
I
so
also
sorry,
help.
Ellen. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. It still is a little too zoomed in. We don't see like the bottom of the maybe if you could X out and then get back in.
Okay.
It kind of is moving around. So sorry.
The slides themselves, Brooke?
Yeah, like it's not showing the full thing. It's kind of zoomed into just like the middle portion of it. So maybe try just presenting it from normal. Maybe something got weird.
Okay. How's that?
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Other people are saying they can see the full slide, so I don't know. Maybe it was just me.
Okay.
Well, now I can see it, but when you're in presentation mode,
Let's see if this is better. How's that, Brooke?
Okay, it's still in the I still see only like the top right portion of the screen.
Okay, we'll just stick with this then.
Sorry.
It's okay. Is that good? You can see the
Yeah,
whole thing?
I can see the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So our learning objectives for today are that I'm going to go back to number 2 to recognize how these challenges present in both people living with dementia and their care partners. And also, we're going to talk about applying practical strategies to support emotional well-being in people living with dementia and their care partners. Okay. So let's first start by talking about why this topic matters, why it's important to discuss mental health in dementia caregiving, but also for people living with dementia as well. So dementia impacts more than just our memory. It can make a lot of different changes in our brain and make things feel really, really different for us. And so it's important to explore all of those different aspects of care. Mental health needs can often be hidden or put on the back burner. And so hopefully, by talking about this stuff today, it helps to highlight some of these things and draw attention to maybe some of these experiences are already happening and we're just not aware that that is happening and for our loved ones or in our own lives. Also, too, stress can often show up through behavior. It's not always in words. And so we'll talk about some common behaviors today or just like things to look for that some of these mental health challenges can appear as rather than saying, I feel really anxious or I feel really on edge. And then it's important because it impacts both those living with dementia and their care partners. And so anything in that category for me is important to talk about. But before I really start looking at some of the information we're going to talk about today, I like to give this disclaimer. So, part of my presentation today is going to be talking about the experience of people living with dementia. And I recognize that I am not a person living with dementia. And so, really, the information I found today is through my own experience and through research. But I also like to just give this disclaimer that says before we turn to research, professional recommendations, or best practices, we must pause and acknowledge something essential. People living with dementia are experts in their own experience. So, whenever possible, their preferences, opinions, routines, and values should guide their own decisions about their environment, their life, their choices. And then I always like this quote, nothing about us without us, from the National Council of Dementia Minds, which just always further enforces that when we're making decisions for people living with dementia, they should be included in those decisions and have the opportunity to express their thoughts and opinions about that as well. All right, so let's dive into looking at explaining mental health and kind of what that means and some different aspects of that. So, mental health includes many different things. So, it includes emotional well being, psychological functioning, our ability to cope and adapt, but it can also be influenced by changes that occur in our brain and changes in our environment as well. So it's important to recognize that mental health is not separate from dementia. It is a part of the experience for both those living with dementia and their care partners. And also, our mental health and the quality of our mental health will fluctuate at times throughout our dementia journey for any of us. And SAMHSA defines mental health. I really like this definition that says mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well being. It affects how we think, feel, and act, and helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. So, mental health covers a lot of different things, as we saw. But when I think of like good mental health versus poor mental health, this is kind of what comes to mind. So, good mental health, when our mental health is in a really positive light or we're feeling really good mentally, it has an overall positive impact on our life and our ability to manage our responsibilities, but also our ability to experience joy and find purpose in our life out of things that we do. But if we're dealing with poor mental health, if maybe we're not managing our mental health, we're ignoring some of the signs that we're seeing, that can have an overall negative impact on our life, our physical health, and also the view of ourselves. and how we interact with the world and people around us. Mental health also is very, very closely linked to our physical health. So, not caring for our mental health is also not caring for our physical health. So, an example is that dealing with depression, untreated depression, can increase our risk for many types of conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, or stroke. And also, on the other hand, the presence of chronic conditions like diabetes, heart disease, or stroke can increase the risk of developing a mental health condition. So that's why it's important to talk about what we're going to talk about here today. So we know what to look for, how to recognize that, but also how we can support each other with when we're dealing with these things. So mental health is a part of our life throughout our whole entire life. So, but I found this graphic on the CDC website that I really, really liked. And I liked how they explained different transitions and different stages that we experience in our life and how that relates and can impact our mental health. So, I really focused in on three different sections of this graphic for today's presentation. And you can see I typed the same words in the graphic. I thought they were kind of small. I typed them out a little to the left so everybody can see that. So, here at Alzheimer's Services, we help people across all different parts of our lifespan, but I would say majority of our clients can be our young adults. So that can be care partners, that are maybe caring for their loved ones living with dementia. And then we have care partners and people living with dementia in middle adulthood and older adulthood. And so in our young adulthood, positive mental health and well being can help young adults through different transitions, such as entering college or the workforce or starting a family. Middle adulthood, so that age group of like 27 to 64 years old, life stressors can be related to jobs, parenting, caregiving, and relationships. And then in older adulthood, which the CDC classifies as above 65 years old, they may experience life changes that impact their mental health, such as retirement, coping with a serious illness, or losing a loved one. And some may experience feelings of grief, social isolation, or loneliness. And so, if we're not mindful of our mental health, if we're not taking steps to protect our mental health and care for ourselves, you can see where it can impact us at different stages in our life and how some of those stages are huge. I mean, starting a family, being a caregiver, losing a loved one, those things are huge parts of our life. And for our mental health to not be the best it can be, can make those transitions that much more difficult. Okay. So let's just take a brief look on the impact of dementia and some of the changes that dementia makes to our brains and to our life. So, dementia can cause for uncertainty and confusion. It also can cause for a loss of feelings of control. So, a lot of times people with dementia lose that ability to feel like I am in control of my life. Also, a misinterpretation of our surroundings. For people with dementia, things are not always as they appear to be. And so that can be really, really challenging. We also have a strong emotional memory when people are diagnosed with dementia, where maybe our, short-term memory is not as strong. Maybe I struggle more to remember things in the day to day. But a lot of times that emotional memory, and so that would be that memory connected to our emotions, to our feelings. And a lot of times we see in our loved ones with dementia that maybe they don't always remember the words that we use or what we said, but a lot of times they can remember how they felt about a situation. And they take that away. And sometimes that resonates and sits with them for a really long time. Also, too, dementia, independence changes in meeting needs. So, our ability to meet our own needs independently changes. And sometimes we can endure unmet needs because we're not able to manage those things on our own. And because of some of the language changes that we also experience with dementia, it can be hard to communicate those changes and needs to other people. And also, too, we see changes in the way that information is interpreted for people living with dementia. All right. And so if we have a loved one that is diagnosed with dementia, we oftentimes then find ourselves in a position to become a care partner. And so these are some of the impacts that becoming a care partner also has on our life as well. So being a care partner can cause for confusion and uncertainty about what to do next and the best choices to make when we become responsible for another person. Also, too, that loss of control over our own routines, our own roles, and our own decisions. Because a lot of times, being a care partner for a person with dementia can take over a lot of aspects of our life. And a lot of times, our routines and who we are as a person who we're used to being can go out the window sometimes. Also, too, as care partners, we deal with a misinterpretation of behaviors and intentions. So that can be seen a couple different ways. We can misinterpret our loved ones' behaviors and what they intended through different actions, but also our loved ones can deal with that from us too, and not always be able to understand what we need and how we want things done. We also deal with some strong emotional responses to caregiving moments, changes in our own independence, and relationship shifts and relationship dynamic shifts. And then also sometimes too, just an information overload where we are just so filled with information that sometimes it can become overwhelming and can be really difficult to process any changes that we might see that can bring on. Okay. So then seeing those changes laid out, those changes that dementia causes for not only those living with the diagnosis, but for their care partners, a lot of times due to those changes experienced by people living with dementia and their care partners, these common mental health challenges can occur. And so today we're really going to highlight depression, anxiety, apathy, grief, loss, and identity changes. And that's what we're really going to talk about and the impact that we see on each of in our lives with when we deal with each of these. So let's take a look at each of them individually, starting with depression. So depression, the Mayo Clinic defines depression as a mood disorder that causes a persistent feeling of sadness and loss of interest. Depression can be common in the early stages of dementia. We'll see sometimes people that are recently diagnosed that were in that place where I know something is wrong, I feel differently, but I'm not always sure how to navigate that or what to do about it yet. And so sometimes what people experience from that then are feelings of depression. But it also can occur at any time in the dementia journey. It's not exclusive to just those early stages. And depression can be influenced by changes in our brain due to dementia, but also life circumstances as well. And then I picked this little graphic today because I think this is a good explanation of what depression can feel like for people, where it sometimes can just feel like we have this cloud over our life. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why depression happens, specifically in dementia care. So for people living with dementia, depression oftentimes can happen because of brain changes that are occurring that can affect our mood regulation and our emotional processing. So all of those skills that we have that when we, experience a type of mood and we, maybe naturally learn how to compartmentalize those things and move past them. Sometimes that can be hard for people living with dementia because of the way that our brain changes. Also, too, an awareness of our cognitive decline can lead to things like fear, grief, or shame, especially like we talked about in those early stages. Also, people living with dementia are experiencing a loss of independence, a loss of their own identity, and a loss of their routine and how they've lived their life for a long time. A confusion or misinterpretation of the environment can create anxiety or sadness. People living with dementia are very susceptible and sensitive to changes in the environment. And some people become more sensitive to sound, to light, to temperature, things like that. And so things like that and misinterpreting our environment can make us feel more anxious or on edge or sad. Also, too, it can often become difficult to express our thoughts and our emotions in the way that we're used to. We may experience reduced engagement in meaningful activities, so that withdrawal or that apathy that we're going to talk about later. But it's also important to acknowledge that depression may not always look like this guy, the guy in our graphic with the cloud over his head. Depression may also appear as irritability, withdrawal, apathy, or agitation, just being short or on edge with people in your life. And then let's look at why depression can happen for care partners. So, care partners often chronic stress activates our fight or flight response. So, our fight or flight response is that survival response. When our brain perceives a threat, perceives some type of danger to us, that's when it makes a decision. Am I going to fight? Am I going to deal with this? Or am I going to run away from it and flight? And whenever we are a dementia caregiver, sometimes we have that type of response where our brain is perceiving some type of threat to us, whether that is just a change in routine or a change in our loved ones, maybe they're declining. All kinds of different things and aspects of dementia caregiving can cause for us to feel stress. And so sometimes we feel stress for so long as a care partner that it almost leaves us feeling like we're on edge, like we are turned on and sensitive to that type of response at all times. Also, too, ongoing grief from ambiguous loss as the relationship changes over time. So that ambiguous loss is that very type of confusing type of grief where my loved one is here, but the person in front of me is different than the person I used to know. Or I feel as though I've lost this person, but yet they're still in my life. They're still present. Also, too, just a loss of personal time, a loss of freedom, hobbies, and sometimes career identity. We work with so many care partners who are still working and have full careers. And so sometimes they experience big changes in like the level of responsibility they can take on at work or how available they are for their own job because of the responsibilities they have to dedicate to their loved one. Also, constant responsibility and vigilance that can lead to exhaustion and burnout. Feeling constantly responsible for somebody and having to be vigilant on, what's going on in their life. What do I need to do to think of other people beyond myself is exhausting. And we could become really burnt out at times from that. Also, feeling unheard, unsupported, or isolated in a caregiving role. So many care partners find themselves isolated, like where maybe their loved ones had a lot of friends, a lot of family that used to be involved, but now that the diagnosis is set in and we know more about that, a lot of times people unfortunately distance themselves from that. And so there is a lot of isolation that takes place in being a care partner. Also, social isolation, just due to the general demands of being a care partner and time constraints. Sleep disruption and physical strain can also contribute to a decline in our mood. And then for our care partners, but really anybody, depression may also appear as sadness, irritability, fatigue, or just an overall feeling of hopelessness. But it's important to recognize that our loved ones with dementia and our care partners do have things in common, that they both experience that can lead to depressive symptoms. And so those types of things can be loss of our normal life and our normal routine, uncertainty about the future, emotional strain and grief that takes place, social isolation, and a reduced sense of feeling of control. So let's look at some other things that depression may look like. So depression can look like withdrawal. So really drawing into oneself, not participating actively socially, and just not being as involved outside of our home and our current, like our personal situation. Also feeling worthless, feeling guilty, or having low self-confidence. Having low motivation also is what depression can appear as. Difficulty concentrating, feeling irritable or angry. Also, self neglect can be a part of depression as well, where we no longer prioritize our own self care, but also just like our physical care as well. Maybe I just don't prioritize myself in the same way that I used to. Maybe I'm not, showering as often or taking care of myself in that way or eating properly, that all of that can fall under self-neglect. Tiredness, aches and pains, so some more of those physical symptoms, And also fatigue or sleep changes can appear, is what depression can appear, can look like. So if we hear this today and this sounds familiar, this sounds like somebody in my life, what can we do to support someone with depression? So first and foremost is to help them talk about their thoughts and feelings in just a non-judgmental and open space. Sometimes it just feels better, to get some of these things out because we don't often realize how many other people in our life may be dealing with those same things. And sometimes just being validated in that way helps to alleviate some of that pressure that we experience, whether we're people living with dementia or care partners. Also, being sociable and spending time with other people has shown to reduce our risk of depression. Staying physically active, doing other activities that bring joy, even if that's small things that you just do by yourself, watching shows that you used to really like that made you feel really happy, or taking a walk, things like that. Eat a wide range of healthy foods, continue with any existing treatments. And so if maybe you have taken medication, to help manage depression or gone to therapy, but maybe now my life is just too swamped with other responsibilities and I've kind of let some of those things go off on the back burner. Well, we need to be mindful of those things because taking care of those things can really help us to feel supported. Seek out professional support if it's something that's not present in your life. Develop positive routines and a sense of purpose. Create an environment that minimizes stress. I feel very intentional about the way, like, if I have a hard day at work, I always look forward to going home because my home, I try to make it an environment where I feel minimal stress. Um, Even if I need to like go home and turn some of the lights off and just have the lamp on or just no TV, maybe I'm just reading for the evening. Creating an environment like that can just minimize stress and help to take care of some of those feelings of depression. And then also to be mindful of energy levels too. And so, as we talked about, sometimes our people, that are experiencing depression can have lower energy levels. And so, we need to be mindful of that for people and be able to work with them if they do experience that. Let's see, I'm just going to edit something real quick. I can, Brooke, can you look into turning off that? It looks like somebody might have their pencil on and they're
Yep, I do
editing
see it.
screen. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's look at anxiety. Okay, so anxiety is defined by the American Psychological Association as an emotion characterized by apprehension and somatic symptoms of tension in which an individual anticipates impending danger, catastrophe, or misfortune. The body often mobilizes itself to meet the perceived threat, and muscles become tense, breathing is faster, and the heart beats more rapidly. So, anxiety can worsen the symptoms of dementia, particularly the symptoms that affect a person's attention, planning, organizing, and decision making. So, why does anxiety happen in people? Let's look at that a little bit. So, let's first talk about people living with dementia. So, anxiety can occur because of the brain changes, again, similar to depression, but our brain changes that occur with dementia can heighten the fear response that we have and reduce our ability to filter perceived threat. So our brain maybe is just not as able and independent as it used to be in taking what we perceive as a threat and, filtering through that and being able to tell us this is not threatening, you're safe, everything is okay. Also, too, confusion about time, place, or people can feel frightening or disorienting, and a misinterpretation of surroundings. So sometimes people with dementia, may think that someone in their space is an intruder or they're confused about the surroundings that they're in, and that can increase our fear that we experience. Also, too, difficulty understanding what is happening often leads to insecure feelings. Also experiencing a sensory overload. So that can be noise, crowds, unfamiliar environments can really cause us to feel agitated or really anxious. Changes in routine can feel destabilizing, and unsafe. An emotional memory may amplify fear even if the original trigger is gone, especially stressful, like a stressful television show. So maybe I experience a I'm watching a stressful television show and later on, I'm feeling really anxious, even though that television show has been turned off. So that can happen a lot of times for people with dementia. And sometimes, if they watch things that can be stressful or scary, they later on, can even have those experiences or what they saw on TV or in the news can even influence their memory and can cause for confusion in that aspect as well. And anxiety can also appear as pacing, agitation, calling out, or restlessness. So, why anxiety happens for our care partners? So, care partners often chronic care partner stress or caregiver stress keeps the nervous system at a heightened state, as we were talking about earlier. So, a lot of times when we have that fight or flight, maybe we react in a heightened way. And so, also constant worry about safety, health, and what might happen next. We also, as care partners, can deal with what's called anticipatory anxiety, where we're worrying. Thank you so much, Brooke. We're worrying about things that could happen. So, what if my loved one falls? What if one day my loved one wanders out of the house and gets lost? Or what if my loved one's decline occurs in a certain way that I fear? And so, a lot of times, as care partners, we are worrying about things that are in the future that we really can't predict, but we still worry about those things. And also feeling responsible for preventing all possible negative outcomes. So, a lot of times when we're a care partner, we feel responsible for negative feelings that maybe our loved ones experience, or things just like not working out in a good way for them, and that is a big, big burden to bear. That puts a lot on our plate. And so that can make us to feel really anxious. Also, information overload. Maybe you're managing your own appointments, your kids' appointments, your parents' appointments, or medications, or maybe different behavioral expressions that your loved ones are displaying. And maybe there's just always something new that you're taking in that you're learning how to navigate. That alone can make us feel anxious. Also, too, a lack of control over unpredictable situations or progression of disease. A lot of times we want to be able to control what our loved ones deal with, what the situation, how it's going to work out. But that is a part of dementia that we can't control. We only have limited amounts of things that we can be responsible for. And their brain is going to decline in the way, unfortunately, that their brain does. And we can only change so much. What we can change is really the environment, but we can't change the disease experience all the time. Also, too, that difficulty in turning off our thoughts, even during rest or downtime. And anxiety may also appear as worry, restlessness, irritability, and hypervigilance. So, why anxiety happens and those commonalities between our loved ones with dementia and our care partners. So, we everybody oftentimes in that dementia journey, when it comes to anxiety, experiences a heightened sense of uncertainty, feeling unsafe or on edge, having that reduced sense of control, difficulty relaxing or settling, increased stress sensitivity, and sleep disruption is common among people living with dementia and their care partners. And what anxiety may look like in people living with dementia. So, oftentimes, I meet with families, and they are feeling really challenged by the way that their loved one expresses themselves. And sometimes it helps just to hear some of those symptoms and be able to say, I'm hearing from just as an outside person. It sounds like maybe your loved one is feeling really anxious or they're feeling really sad or something like that. Because sometimes when we're a care partner and we have so much on our plate day to day, we're not always able to recognize some of those symptoms. And so, what anxiety may look like in people living with dementia. So, it can look like pacing or restlessness. It can also look like repetitive questions or statements. It can look like calling out or seeking reassurance very, very often. It can be increased confusion or agitation. clinginess or maybe a fear of being alone. A lot of care partners dealing with that, where their loved one only wants to be with them all the time. And that is really difficult. But maybe they're just feeling really, really anxious. Misinterpreting people or the environment, resistance to care or changes in routine, big changes in those in our routine and the way we function our day to day can make us to feel very anxious. And also trouble settling, especially in the evening. If you have a loved one that's really, really restless in the evening, and is maybe trying to leave the home or just can't relax, can't settle down, maybe they're an anxious person. Maybe they're experiencing some anxiety. And in care partners, what anxiety may look like is a constant feeling of worry or a constant what if feeling. Hey, Brooke, I think that marker is on again. You may have to look at that again. Thank you.
Got it.
Thank you so much. Also, feeling on edge or unable to relax, irritability or short temper. Sometimes we're so anxious and we're not able to communicate all the time and telling somebody, I feel really anxious, even if we are that care partner. And sometimes it comes out before we even realize it with maybe we have a short temper or we're very, very irritable. Difficulty concentrating or making decisions. Maybe we have so many anxious thoughts going on that I really can't sit and think through a lot of things. I can't concentrate or make big, big decisions for somebody else. Trouble sleeping again or shutting off our thoughts. And also we can see physical side effects, so physical tension. So maybe in our head, or we have a headache, or maybe we experience tight shoulders, or we feel really fatigued. That can also be anxiety. Feeling overwhelmed or always having a feeling like something bad is going to happen is also a sign, a symptom of anxiety, where we're always catastrophizing a situation. We're always looking for the catastrophe in the situation. And sometimes we make things seem worse because of the anxious process that we go through and thinking things through. And hypervigilant. So, a lot of times, if we're anxious, maybe we're just always watching, always listening, always anticipating something happening. So, ways we can support someone with anxiety. A lot of times it feels just like this graphic where we're just helping to take a little bit of that rain off of them and alleviate them a little bit from some of those stressors that they deal with. So, we want to always try to lead with calm and reassurance for them. We also want to try to validate their feelings. People that experience a lot of anxiety, sometimes a lot of that feels like they're the only person who thinks those things. And so if we can validate those things and say, hey, you're not alone in that, like I can understand that, or I've experienced that feeling before, a lot of times that can make us feel a lot better. We want to try to simplify things or slow things down. A lot of what we talked about is when people feel really anxious, they have a hard time making decisions and thinking things through. And so maybe I need to break things down little by little for them. And that until they return to a state of maybe less anxiety and they do have the ability to process things. We want to try to reduce environmental stressors that could add on to anxiety. Also, it helps people with anxiety, the predictability and routine can make a big difference. We want to try to focus on what we can control in the situation, encourage breaks and rest, use what's called grounding strategies. So, grounding strategies are things that bring us back to ourselves, bring us back to our current environment. So, that could be deep breathing, or some people like to do like what's called a body scan, where I take a second and I'm mindful about all the different aspects of my body and how they feel or what they're doing. There's lots of different grounding strategies. You can look them up on YouTube, things like that, and do some of them online. And also, we want to help to provide them with an opportunity for connecting. Okay. So, our next mental health challenge that we're going to talk about today is what's called apathy. So, apathy is a very common aspect of this disease process, but something that we don't talk about near as much as I think we talk about anxiety and depression. So, apathy is a profound lack of feeling, emotion, interest, or concern. So, apathy in individuals with dementia is often displayed through a loss of motivation or drive. I so often have families, that they become really discouraged because their loved one is not engaging in hobbies maybe they used to do, or interested in things that they used to like. And a lot of times that's just because of the apathy that dementia can bring on. And so a lot of times it can feel like this person in the graphic where you just feel really meh about a lot of things, where you just have a lack of feeling, a lack of investment and interest in things. So, why apathy happens oftentimes in people with living with dementia. So, again, those brain changes. So, brain changes can affect our motivation, our initiative, and our reward system. So, right now we may do things if we are a care partner or a person living without dementia, sometimes we're like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take these three tasks off my plate. And afterwards, I'm going to be able to relax. I'm going to feel really good. But for people with dementia, they don't always have that ability. And so they don't have that internal reward system all the times that people living without dementia can do. Also, there is just a general difficulty for people living with dementia in initiating activities. Even the things they used to enjoy can sometimes be very taxing and hard for them to become invested in. Oftentimes, people with dementia appear withdrawn, passive, or uninterested. And I think a lot of times that is the apathy. It doesn't mean that people are not interested and, are not able to engage, but sometimes it's just their dementia appearing as these things or causing them to appear in that way. Also, too, people with dementia can experience a reduced emotional expression. So that ability that we have to express our emotions, which can a lot of times look like a flat affect. So if you see someone who doesn't have a lot of emotional expression, that can be what that looks like. Needs more prompting or supporting to start tasks. So people with dementia really need that person to encourage them to start their task throughout their day to day sometimes. Also, people with dementia may sit for long periods of time without engaging. And it's often not them choosing to disengage, but really it's just their neurological changes that are driving this. And a lot of times it can be mistaken for depression, but really it's just more about that lack of initiation in things. So, for our care partners, emotional exhaustion and burnout reduce our energy and our motivation, and that can make us feel really apathetic. Are just feeling too tired to care. Maybe your glass is just totally poured out and we just have nothing left to give, or we're just lacking in motivation to engage. Also, withdrawal from social connections or previously enjoyed activities because of the stress of being a care partner and because of the time constraints maybe we deal with. Emotional numbing, maybe as a coping response to chronic stress. Maybe for some people, the way that they deal with their loved one's diagnosis is they just try to help themselves feel numb and they try to detach themselves from the experience. Also, too, decision fatigue from constant caregiving responsibilities, maybe feeling stuck or overwhelmed or leading, which can often lead to inaction. If I feel stuck, it's really hard for me to get motivated to take action on things. You may feel guilt or shame about that decreased motivation, and a lot of times apathy can overlap with depression and burnout. So, for our people living with dementia and our care partners, why apathy happens for both of them is oftentimes that reduced engagement in our meaningful activities, that loss of motivation or drive, that social withdrawal, that decreased sense of purpose, and an increased risk of depression a lot of times. So, what apathy may look like in people living with dementia. So, apathy can look like a person with dementia sitting for long periods without initiating activity. I often feel like for people that are caring for a loved one with dementia, and their loved one just wants to sit and watch TV, I think a lot of times that is harder on the care partner than it is on the person with dementia. Sometimes that's where they feel they're most comfortable, they feel they're safest. It's just in that predictable environment. But I think it's hard for us to watch our loved ones not engaging and not doing things they used to do. It can also look like reduced conversation or engagement, appearing withdrawn or checked out, and decreased participation in social settings. And in our care partners, it can look like withdrawing from friends, hobbies, or activities, Doing only what is necessary. So having that task focused functioning where these are the things I need to do, I'll get those things done, but I can't do any more. Maybe emotional numbness or detachment from our feelings, and procrastination or avoidance of task. So, how do we support someone with apathy? So, I think the first and best thing we can do for someone with apathy is to recognize that apathy is neurological, that it's not laziness, it's not a lack of effort, it's not a lack of interest, it's neurological. It's just part of the disease process or just part of our neurological process in our brain, whether we have dementia or not, we can experience apathy. We also want to try to lower expectations for people. Maybe they're just feeling really overwhelmed and they have just really started to shut down from the amount of overwhelmed feelings they're experiencing. So we want to try to help them focus on small, achievable steps. We want to focus on engagement over outcome. So doing matters more than the result of the situation. So getting them engaged in something or getting ourselves and motivated to do something, that really matters more than how it ends up turning out. Because sometimes if we're feeling apathetic, if we're experiencing a lot of apathy, maybe as a care partner and we don't want to experience those feelings, coaxing ourselves out of that little by little and working on that and just doing small tasks at a time can be much more easy to tackle than just like dealing with this mountain of things in front of me. And we also, for people that are dealing with apathy, we want to make sure that we celebrate participation and not worry about the performance, which is, similar to what we were talking about. And then just a special note for our care partners is to avoid taking apathy personally. Understand that not starting something does not equal that they don't care. And then also taking breaks to reduce frustration and burnout. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about is grief, loss, and identity changes. So grief in dementia care refers to the ongoing emotional response to loss experienced by both the person living with dementia and their care partners, and is often gradual, ongoing, and ambiguous. Loss refers to the progressive changes and reductions in abilities, roles, relationships, and sense of self that occur over time. And then also identity changes refers to gradual shifts in how a person sees themselves. So, and how others experience them. So, due to changes in memory, abilities, or roles and personality over time. So, why grief, loss, and identity changes happen for people living with dementia? So, people with dementia can have an awareness of their abilities that they're losing. Maybe they have an awareness that they're not as independent as they once were, and that can really impact their sense of self. Also, just changes in their identity. Maybe now they rely on somebody else, and maybe that person is their spouse or maybe it's their children. And a lot of times that can just feel like I'm not who I used to be. I used to be in charge of all of these things, and I just don't have that same ability, or people want to help me with things maybe they didn't used to feel like they should help me with. We also see a loss of roles. People with dementia are people just like anybody else, just like me and you, and they can operate in roles for a very long time. But a lot of times, as their dementia progresses, they, may lose some of those roles. So whether that is a worker, maybe that is their role as an employee or their role as a parent or a decision maker. Maybe that used to be them. Maybe they used to be in charge of all the decisions in the household, but maybe their loved one, their care partner took over that for them. We also see frustration, sadness, or fear about decline. And they may not always be able to express their grief clearly. Dementia changes our language in some ways. And so maybe we're just struggling if we have dementia to express things in the way that we really, really want to. Like we talked about earlier, our emotional memory may hold on to feelings of loss for a long time. Fluctuating awareness can lead to repeated experience of loss, and they may withdraw or become more dependent as their identity shifts. And then our care partners often deal with ongoing grief related to ambiguous loss. Like we talked about earlier, my loved one is here but changing. Also, we also see a lot of shift in identity for care partners as well. Maybe they were a person's spouse, their child, or their friend. Maybe now they are that care partner, or they're making a lot of the decisions for somebody else. A loss of the relationship as it once was. We used to have this type of relationship with this person, but now because of their dementia, that may be different. Grieving past, present, or anticipated future losses, and carrying an emotional burden while continuing to provide care. Feeling alone in the experience or misunderstood by other people. Often care partners say that even people in their own family, if they're not with them on that day-to-day experience, they don't understand what it is like to care for their loved one living with dementia. Also, they can experience chronic grief without clear resolution or closure, and it can be hard to balance caregiving responsibilities with personal identity loss too. So, what grief, loss, and identity changes may look like? So, it can look like someone experiencing sadness, fear, or frustration about changes. It can look like a decreased dependence on other people, irritability or emotional reactions tied to loss of control. It can look like changes in our confidence or our self-esteem. It can be grieving the relationship as it used to be, mourning future plans that may no longer be possible. Maybe my spouse was diagnosed with dementia and we had all of these plans after we retire, and now that has been interrupted. So we're going to mourn that a lot of times. That is a process that we have to go through. And then again, feeling misunderstood by other people. So how do we support those with grief, loss, and identity changes? So we want to work to acknowledge and validate the loss. Avoid trying to fix it or rush the grief. Sometimes there's not a solution to certain aspects of grief and loss and identity changes. Some things are just hard, and we just have to go through hard things sometimes. And so we can't always fix it, and we want to let a person do it at their own pace. We also want to create space for emotions and allow a person to feel like they can express their emotions with us, that we are a safe space for them. We want to maintain connection and presence with people, support their identity by honoring their past roles. Even if they may feel like they've lost those things, we want to always remind them that we were there during those times too, and that's still an important aspect of their life. Help finding new meaning or purpose in small ways. Encourage maintaining their own identity outside of dementia care. We want to try to have life outside of being a care partner or a person with dementia. It's just an aspect of our life. We can still have so much to look forward to. And then we also want to try to validate mixed emotions for people, and always recognizing that two things can be true at the same time. This can be hard, but there can also be a lot of good in a situation. And two things can be true and exist at the same time. So I found this quote yesterday and I really liked it, so I wanted to add it in that says, "You are allowed to be both a caring person and someone who needs care." Okay. So then I, of course, wanted to include some good resources for you guys about mental health. And if some of this stuff resonated with you today and you're like, man, I could really use some support to sort of better understand what it is I'm experiencing, these are some avenues you can take. So here at Alzheimer's Services, we always have our helpline that you're available to call and ask questions. That's Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. We offer 9 different support groups, some of those in person, some of those online. We have our Brain Cafe for people living with dementia to come and connect with others, and share in those experiences. We have our book club where care partners connect every month. We read a book, but we also connect in commonalities that we share. And then also here too at Alzheimer's Services, we have a resource list called our Medical Care and Mental Health Resource List, in which we have some mental health resources listed. We also include on there some private practice therapists for anybody that may be looking for someone to see on an individual basis. And a lot of those people will see both care partners and people living with dementia as well. I've also included for you the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. They have a helpline, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Alzheimer's Association, they have their 24/7 helpline. I've included for maybe people whose loved one have a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia specifically, there is a Lewy body dementia association and an association of frontotemporal degeneration, so those people with a frontotemporal dementia diagnosis as well. And I put the websites and the phone numbers on here for you, so feel free to take a picture of this, but I'll also email it out after too. We recently learned about an organization called Total Life, which provides support for online and in-person therapy designed specifically for older adults, and they do accept Medicare. There's the National Alliance on Mental Health, NAMI. They have different groups and different support options. Capital Area Human Services, they have a 24/7 crisis line. There's always the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline that is available 24/7, and that is number 988. And then Oceans Behavioral Health here offers outpatient groups, and this is their phone and website as well. So now I have a few minutes if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to discuss on anything we've talked about here today. So let's see. So I can see a couple questions. So one says, my care recipient hums a lot and clutches her clothes or soft cloth to her face. Does anxiety cause these actions? So yes, it does sound like it could potentially be her feeling anxious, especially when we begin to see those repetitive actions that people with dementia do over and over and over again. Sometimes it can just also be a general part of dementia where being repetitive feels good and it's predictable. And so, if anything like that ever were to cause, to become challenging or hard to manage, we can always use the skill of redirection and try to shift their focus onto other things. But it does sound like that could potentially be anxiety, but it could also just be part of the disease process. Someone asked, how do I join the book club? So, our book club, and I'm going to stop sharing so everybody, I can see everybody. So, our book club, actually, we are on a pause right now for the summer, but we will start back in August. So, if you'd like to join the book club, you just have to reach out to me. You can call our office or you can email me. And we meet every month starting from in August. We meet the fourth Thursday of every month, and we will provide you with the book and assign you with all the readings and everything. So just reach out to me if you'd like to join the book club. And then I see another question that says, how would I determine if a support group versus one-on-one counseling is best for me? So I think that's a great question. And what I always recommend for people that have that type of curiosity is that it doesn't hurt to try everything that's available to you. You may try a support group one time and realize, I really like this, or you may realize this isn't for me, and that can happen sometimes. And if that's the case, then maybe one-on-one counseling is something to think into. But I also think just knowing yourself and knowing where you feel most comfortable sharing things about yourself that maybe you wouldn't want to tell somebody else, because a counselor offers you an unbiased place to share things. And so if you feel uncomfortable sharing things in a group setting, a lot or with other people that maybe you don't know, in a big setting, a lot of times a counselor one-on-one can be a good alternative for that. And then someone asked, can you share more about the Alzheimer's Services helpline and what is that? So yes, our helpline is available during our office hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. And our helpline really is just an opportunity for anyone to call our office and reach out with any questions or need that you have. So we can really answer anything from disease related questions, connect you with resources, and even if it's like my loved one did this yesterday, I don't really know what to do or what direction to take. We can really walk you through those things. We also offer walk-in services as well, and it's the same hours that Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4. You're allowed to also reach out to any of us. So in particular, our helpline is managed by myself, my coworker Brooke, and my other coworker Sherelle. And so you're welcome to just reach out, and any support that we can connect you with, we will use our abilities to do that. So we are right at the 1 o'clock hour. So I am going to give, let's see, I see another comment that comes in. A group setting has helped me by hearing other caregivers have had similar experiences. So yes, thank you, Miss Donna, for sharing that. A lot of times a group setting can benefit you in that way, that you hear what other people are going through, and a lot of times you can relate to those people and connect with other people in that way. So I thank y'all so much for participating with us and taking the time out to join me for this hour today. Keep an eye out for that follow-up email that will have all that information and the link to this presentation, but lots of good resources as well. And if you have any questions or anything I can do or anybody in our office can do to support you, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank y'all so much.